Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Custom Figure Redux. Now I wasn't expecting to do another one of these so soon after I did the first one, but I decided to because one, it means I've only got one video currently on that playlist, so I thought it might as well add another one, and also two, because I had this idea to update this custom and I didn't want to wait to show it off because I was really pleased and proud of it. So slight impatience on my part, but what you have here on screen first of all is a picture of the original custom. This isn't the one that appears in the thumbnail. This is the original custom, which was an end of time master with the normal hands repainted, but then the head was a repainted version of a decayed master, again to give him that slightly sort of repainted, to give him that slightly sort of blue skeletal look, and it worked out very well. Very pleased with how it came out. But when I was going through my boxes of spares recently, I discovered that I had several of the head and the hands from the Decayed Master, Classic Master spare, because over the years I've bought several of those for use on other customs using the body underneath, because obviously it's very similar to the Delgado body, but obviously a lot cheaper to get hold of than the Delgado figure. So I've used that over the years, but it means I've ended up with a few head and hands spare. And I noticed that a couple of the sets of the head and hands I have were actually cast in a transparent plastic. Now, I don't know which release that is that it would have been used. It's possible that it could have been any of the releases and that the head and the hands were just cast out of whatever pieces there were spare in the factory going around at the time. But what I decided to do was to take a set of those head and hands and remove the original paint off them so they were completely transparent and see-through, and then give them a blue wash, so you had obviously a slightly more blue tint to them, and then go over the detailing of the eyes and the teeth and everything to make it look like the master had a more skeletal appearance. And that is what you see here. And this is the updated version of the custom. If I bring in a torch in the background, whoops, you can see that the head is transparent, as are the hands. If I just hold it there while he comes around, you can see the head detailing coming up more, and it's come out really well. I'm really pleased with how it looks. It's definitely more closer to what I originally envisioned for this custom. You know, it is one that I am very pleased with, but it just still looks a little bit off. And one thing that I thought would have been really good to do would have been to cast these hands and this head in clear blue resin and actually have one that is completely clear blue. And that was my plan. And then I thought of something so ludicrously outlandish and impossible that there is absolutely no way it would ever be possible. It just wouldn't work. But obviously it's in the thumbnail, so it did work, so let's have a look at it. Now, as you can see from this custom, the head is slightly different. We're going to come back to that in a moment. The hands, unfortunately, didn't come out. I'm still working on them, but the idea is going to be to cast those in transparent plastic as well, and again to have this detailing of the sort of, you know, the lightning bolts on the hands going through the sort of veins on the master's hands. But it is obviously the head where we have the most noticeable difference, because this is in fact a transparent master head with a skull inside it. So obviously I have to take you through the process of how I did this. It was very long-winded, but I'm going to try and give you as much detail on this as it goes around, because, you know, it's great to look at. So what this is, as I said, it's a transparent master head with a skull inside it, but more to the point, it is a clear resin casting of the master's head with a 3D printed and painted skull inside it. As the head goes around, you can see the tip of the nose is obviously the transparent resin. So for this, what I did first of all was to create a mould of the Series 3 master head, because I personally think that's the better sculpt between that and the End of Time one. So I created a casting of the original Series 3 master head. Once I'd made the casting, I then took the measurements of the master's head, the original head that I'd made the casting from, and printed a skull that was more or less the same sort of size that would fit into the head and still leave about 1 millimetre of space around the edge for the resin, which is obviously what's happened here, which I'm very pleased with. The next step obviously was to paint the head, and for that I did give it a slightly more sort of bluish hue, and I put a bit of darker blue around the cheekbones area, again just to give it a bit of definition, and obviously painted the eyes, painted the teeth, and obviously the hole where the nose is. After that we get on to the actual casting process, and this was the bit that was the tricky part, because I had to be very careful about this, because clear resin, at least the clear resin I use, which is the Polycraft stuff, which is the same as the normal resin, dries very quickly, like within 2 to 3 minutes, but it has a much more fluid quality to it. It's much more liquid and watery. The clear resin is much more viscous. It's almost like a syrup, and it takes longer to cure. But because it is more viscous, it's much easier for it to trap air bubbles and things like that. So I had to be very careful about how I did that. So the process I did was to mix up the clear resin and then put just a couple of drops of a pigment in there, a blue pigment, to give it the blue colour. I then, making sure I had enough excess resin, got a bit of resin on the end of my finger, gloved latex finger, I hasten to add, not bare finger, and rubbed it around the inside of the mould. So effectively, when the resin excess got poured into the mould, it would mean that the air bubbles that would form by just pouring it in shouldn't have been there. Obviously, it's always trial and error. Thankfully, as you can see, they weren't there. So once I'd poured that into the mould, once I had coated the inside of the mould, I poured in the excess resin. Now, obviously, you only have a very limited time to do this before it starts drying, so the next thing I did was to give the 3D printed skull a coat of resin as well, just a very thin coat, again for the same reason, to make sure that the other resin adhered to it, but also to make sure that no air bubbles would form inside the gaps on the skull, like the nose area, etc. I then, once I had coated the skull, put it into the still liquid resin in the mould, and then, because obviously at that point resin had obviously just come out under pressure, I then used the excess resin to fill the mould back up. Obviously this did leave me with more excess resin, but it was better to have more than not enough. After that, it was just a case of waiting for it to dry, which I did. Obviously I then got it out of the mould, and the last thing I did was just to give his hair a slight, very slight weather of white acrylic paint, just to make it stand out a bit more, because if you look at the clips of him when he transforms, his hair does sort of still have that slight detailing on the skull, on the head, sorry. The skull that I have used is obviously slightly larger than is seen on screen. There's a definitive gap between the sort of outside of his head and the skull. But I decided to go for a slightly larger skull just because it makes it easier, it fitted into the mould better, and it just meant that the eyes would be in the right place, the teeth and the nose would be in the right place. So there's not as much gap as there is on screen, but you know, I still think it looks very good, and I'm very pleased with how it's come out. Obviously, the hands, unfortunately, didn't come out as well, but so I've had to resort to using the standard ones, but I'm going to go back and do the hands. It was important that the head came out. That was the important thing. But a couple of points I just want to go over whilst it's going round, and for the sake of talking in this Redux. Obviously, the use of clear resin for custom figures is something which has been used many times by many people. Most notably, one use I've seen it for is to make regeneration figures, i.e., you know, a figure with a clear orange head and hands to make a regeneration figure, which is, you know, something that I've considered doing, but I've never done it. But it's something that I might do now. I've gotten used to mixing the resin and clear resin and knowing how it works and seeing how the pigments come out. But obviously, the idea of having something inside the resin is a really great idea. and it's something that I would love to do in future, but I'm sure that obviously, like many people, my first thoughts were thinking something like, like that promo of the 12th Doctor where he gets electrocuted and you see his skeleton inside him, or the 10th Doctor when he gets shot by a Dalek and you see bits of the skeleton inside him, or just somebody being exterminated by a Dalek. All fantastic ideas, certainly things that I would love to be able to do, but being simply honest, saying, I'm sure there's going to be people saying, oh, you should make this, make that. It really, unfortunately, I wish it was, it is not that simple, because to do something like that, I would have to take apart a figure to its very, very basic parts. I would then have to cast each one individually. I would then have to make sure that I would have a 3D printed bit of a skeleton inside it. I would then have to cut the skeleton to make sure that it fitted in. I would also have to make sure that there were the right parts of the body to make sure that it all still fitted together, the pegs and things like that. And when you break it down, it's just not that easy to do a whole figure like that. A head is a different matter because it is just a solid mass of plastic. But things like a torso, it's got all the connecting joints, it's got to have the right areas where the, where the arms are going to go in, and obviously the thing is as well, a figure, resin figure, is resin. It is brittle. It wouldn't stand up to the scrutiny probably of being able to have moving joints and things like that. Obviously the option is there to cast a whole figure and then put a skeleton inside it and cast the figure in clear plastic, and again, that is possible, but obviously then you lose all the articulation on it. And even then, it's still resin, it's still brittle, it will only do so much, But it is something which I am considering. I've just got to find the right project to be able to do it. For, as I said, previous reasons of it's just not as simple as just make this figure, it never is, sadly. I wish it was. The other thing very quickly that I will just say is I will not be making any casts of this or any other versions of this for sale, simply because of the amount of work that goes into it to do it. The printing of the skull, the painting of the skull, the mixing of the resin, then having to wait at least 24 hours for it to set because it takes a lot longer than standard resin. And even then, once I get it out of the mould, it might fail, there might be air bubbles in it, and obviously because it's clear resin, I can't just fill it in with Milliput, so I'd have to start the process again. I can't reuse the same skull, so I'd have to make a new one, I'd have to paint it again. You get the idea, it's just too much work. I would love to be able to sell casts of this, but it is, or to make these for sale. Because obviously if I just made a standard cast of this head, it would just be the Master's head. You wouldn't see the skull inside it. It has to be cast in a very specific way to get the right effect. Yeah, I wish I could make casts of this for sale, but it unfortunately is just not. It is not as easy as that. But the process of making this wasn't easy either. But I think the results speak for itself. And if anybody else considers trying this, please let me know. I would love to see the results you come out with. I think it has worked really well, and it is a custom, a redone custom that I'm very, very pleased with, because it's much closer to what I would have originally loved to do when I made the original custom. But that brings to a close another custom figure Redux. This is definitely one of those ambitious customs that is easily going to stay on the top of my list for a very long time, because firstly I didn't think it would ever work. Secondly, I'm really pleased it did work, and just the idea of it was just so simple and ludicrous that I did this on a tweet. I said, I posted a clip of Captain Jack Sparrow, that famous scene where Beckett says, "You're mad," and he says, "Thank goodness for that. If I wasn't, this would probably never work." And that really is how I sum up this custom. Another good one would be McDonald from The Great Escape, where he says it's so stupid it's positively brilliant. I really, really didn't expect this to work as well as it did, but it did, and I am absolutely super proud of it. More so when I get the hands done, but at the end of the day, the hands I can live without for now. It was the head that was the important one to get right, so to have that done is absolutely fantastic. So that brings to a close another custom figure Redux. As always, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Like, subscribe, share, it really helps me out a lot, and be sure to description below for a link to my Patreon. I'm doing my very first figure animation and you can get involved. There's exclusive content and rewards for those who do so, and funding my Patreon in any way gets your name at the end of my videos. I salute you all, and I will see you with another video very soon.